Okay, you are in for a treat if you're interested in metabolic health because I'm interviewing Dr. Cate Shanahan, who is a pioneer in helping us understand about the dangers of vegetable, which is a greenwashing term for seed oils, um, and the damage they do to our metabolic health. I mean, they're really one of the most pernicious products you can take. And we have a broad range of topics that we discuss, specifically about carbs and glucose. And I think you're going to be fascinated about one topic that's in her new book, Dark Energy, that I'm particularly intrigued with. And that is a simple, easy measure that each and every one of you can do, because clearly being insulin sensitive is the key to having your body have the tools and resources to create sufficient cellular energy so that you can repair and regenerate and experience the health and the joy that each and every one of you deserve to have.
When you look at nutrition and health through the lens of oxidative stress, it is so powerful because it helps bring everything into clarity. You just have to ask the question, okay, is this thing promoting oxidative stress? When I improved my diet, I improved my metabolism, I improved my personality, I improved my immune system function, I improved every aspect of my health. And it just came from getting these big bad ingredients out of my diet.
Welcome, everyone. Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we are joined by Dr. Cate Shanahan. Really delight and a privilege. We've had her on before, but not for a while. And she has a new book, Dark Calories. Doesn't that sound mysterious? Yes, indeed. So if you don't know of her work, she's quite prominent. She's a real iconoclast and a rebel, somewhat like myself, and has embraced the low carb concept and low carb community like I did, and now is ostracized from that community from her new position in shifting. And I think she's really one of the rare individuals in medical physician. She is a physician like myself. She's a family physician. Actually, I'm a general practice physician, but we both did family practice or general practice residencies, which we both believe is the best residency to prepare yourself for medicine, because you're a generalist and you get to see the whole picture. So we're going to discuss her book. Her first book was epic, and really many people have read it. It's a classic. It's called Deep Nutrition, but she really goes beyond that book in this one and helps us understand some of the most foundational components and a pragmatic, practical levels that you can implement and really change your health quite dramatically. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mercola. It's great to be on your show once again.
Yes, I'm so excited because we share very similar philosophies with respect to what is the fundamental cause of disease. And it's really a disruption in our ability to create energy. And certainly this oxidative stress and inflammation is our part of that. And it just, when we don't have energy, bad things happen. And you help identify some of those strategies. So what you're best known for, and I really want to applaud your early pioneering efforts, is helping. You were one of the first physicians to have a deep understanding of the dangers of seed oils or vegetable oils. And you were kind enough to look at a preview copy of my book and helped me understand that my focus was, and many others in this area, is on linoleic acid, which is the fat, the primary fat that's responsible for most of the destructive damage in seed oils. But you helped me understand that focusing on that long, difficult to say word is not probably a good strategy for a mass market. And it really better to focus on the danger of where it comes from, which is almost always processed foods, ultra processed foods, and putting the focus on that and getting people to put their toe in the water and start make changes rather than seeking to get acquainted with a term they've never heard of before and understand science that's too complex and overwhelming. So I really appreciate your input on that. And as a result of that, I shifted the focus in the book from that because I think it's going to be very helpful. So maybe you can help us understand your journey in this area, and because you've got such a deep knowledge and insights on the impact that this molecule, that this perversion of healthy food has brought on our population.
Absolutely. So it really started for me while I was working as a young family physician on the island of Hawaii, and feeling really deeply unsatisfied in my career choice, even though family medicine is the best specialty. And I really enjoyed helping people understand, identifying what their symptoms were coming from and what to do about them, and often alleviating a lot of fear about, scary things causing pain. But I felt like the part of my practice that was around the chronic disease management, that part felt so false and so hollow. And I really questioned whether or not I was making any difference or even doing any good at all. So I'm talking about like just refilling drugs for hypertension. Because people would come in and they would have the high blood pressure, and I would say, "Oh gosh, your blood pressure is still high." And they'd be like, "Well, yeah, actually, doc, I didn't take the medications every day." And I would just, yeah, right. I would just ask, "Oh, well, okay, how come?" Because I was wanting to really get at, were they having side effects, and maybe we could switch it around. But then they would almost always say, "Well, it didn't make me feel any better," and my job as a physician, I felt, was to alleviate suffering, and giving them these drugs that often do have side effects, but it didn't make them feel better. And so I just felt like that wasn't wrong. And plus, it didn't even keep them out of the hospital. And of course, it was multiple different management of different diseases with drugs, diabetes and asthma, and like early Alzheimer's drugs, and just on and on it went. It was like really felt like I wasn't curing anything. Often I wasn't helping. And so often the drugs, they couldn't take them and they didn't want to take them. And it disrupted my joy of practicing medicine. And I didn't know what to do or where to go to look. I kind of had resigned myself to somewhat of an unsatisfying career. I was looking down.
When was this, or what year, and how far into your career was this?
Well, this was like, fresh out of school until, which was about 1997, and then until about 2002, when everything changed for me. And in that year, the worst thing that had ever happened to me happened, which was I got a really serious, kind of severe, somewhat mysterious, difficult to diagnose, impossible to treat in the medical system, medical problem myself. And I became a medical mystery. I, went to different specialists and even had surgery, different procedures, nothing helped. And so it wasn't until my husband said, "You know what, you kind of eat a lot of sugar." And it might have even come from one of your articles, Dr. Mercola, where you talked about some newsletter that was still in print at the time, talked about how just a teaspoon of sugar can suppress white blood cell, the immune system, for a while. And I was fascinated by that. And so I kind of dove into the subject of nutrition, and quickly, though, ran into something that had nothing to do with sugar at all. Or like, what my husband thought was the problem with my diet was my sweet tooth, and that I had a horrible sweet tooth. He actually said that like I ate like an army of ants because I ate that much sugar. But I quickly ran into a term called essential fatty acids. And, I had learned about those in school. I knew that they were involved in the inflammation reaction and the starting and ending of inflammatory responses for helping us fight infections. But I didn't really realize that I was eating something that had anything to do with those reactions. And so when I encountered the term essential fatty acids, I was like, "Oh, wow, this is chemistry. I need to know more about this." And very quickly, I realized that these were polyunsaturated fatty acids, and that oxidation and oxygen and polyunsaturated fatty acids from vegetable oils were a bad combination. And so I just dove into the science really, really deeply. And realized,
excuse me for interrupting here, but I think it would be helpful to understand that you're just not a regular physician. You have training prior to going to medical school at Cornell, I believe, in biochemistry and molecular biology. So you have deep knowledge about the science here. So you have additional insights that the normal family doctor doesn't have.
Yes, so thank you for bringing that up because I was a molecular biologist and biochemist at Cornell before I went to medical school. So the minute I saw the term polyunsaturated fatty acid, I knew that these things were going to be a problem to use for cooking because they would react with oxygen and they could deteriorate into toxins. So that really piqued my interest. And I started going down that rabbit hole because it was something that I knew was vitally important in terms of understanding the root cause of disease that I had been looking for. But it was something that I didn't learn in medical school. And this is the crazy thing that I thought was crazy. I had learned saturated fat was the root cause of a lot of diseases. And saturated fat doesn't react with oxygen. And so when I started thinking about what I learned in medical school about nutrition against the backdrop of the chemistry of how the body works, I realized that I might have learned a big fat lie. And it was intriguing. It was disappointing. It was stressful. But at the same time, it was hopeful because I was like, well, gosh, maybe this will help me explain what's really going on with my patients. I had been a doctor who wanted to find those root causes. And I was very optimistic that this looked so promising because we already knew, medical science already knew that oxidative stress was playing a role in triggering inflammatory reactions. And we already knew oxidative stress was playing a role in a lot of the degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's dementia, a lot of neurologic disorders, diseases, of aging, degenerative diseases were all driven by oxidative stress. And aging itself was thought to be accelerated or driven by oxidative stress. So I just knew this was so important. And I started writing what was going to be a really short book where I just basically focused on don't eat sugar and vegetable oils. And it took me 8 years to finish that first book. And that became Deep Nutrition, which was published in 2009 as a self-published book originally.
So, Cate, I'm wondering if you can remember the timing of all this that occurred where you understood it was the PUFAs and the seed oils that were destroying your health. And I know you likely had to do some serious study, but what was the year that all this process? Because it was clearly before most anyone in the traditional conventional medical system understood this.
Yeah, it was 2002. I remember the year very distinctly because it's the year that totally changed my life and the way I practiced medicine. Mm-hmm. And it basically enabled me to go from a somewhat disgruntled, almost, well, certainly dissatisfied family medicine doctor who couldn't really get to root causes to getting like the best reward ever, be able to just tell my patients what to eat so that they could start to heal. And it took me a while before I gained the confidence that I needed to literally go against everything I'd learned my whole life about saturated fat, butter, and, telling people to avoid liver or don't eat eggs. And they didn't like that. They didn't like doing that because it wasn't how they grew up eating. And so it was just this excitement about being able to connect them back to their roots and connect them to the joy of cooking, just like that old cookbook from the 1940s. They really, and it helped me to appreciate just how important culinary traditions are and just how profoundly the American Heart Association disrupted food culture by telling us this made up idea that they made up that saturated fat was bad and was going to cause your cholesterol to go up, and therefore your cholesterol being high would cause a heart attack and you die. So it just terrified people to eat their traditional meals. And that has been such a...
That's surprising because I thought they were one of your favorite medical organizations.
The American Heart Association. Yeah. So you've been following my Twitter feed, huh? Maybe we talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
No, the American Heart Association is a corrupt organization, and they're corrupt from head to toe now. When they were first founded, they had good intentions. This was in the 1920s, but we know from their own meeting minutes, we know that they voted to start accepting industry money. And it was a heated debate. Half the people, almost half, not quite enough of the leaders in the 1940s voted against because they were concerned that accepting industry money was basically a conflict of interest that would deter them from really getting to the true root cause of heart attacks. And that's exactly what happened, because the people who just wanted to accept industry money, they won. Money talks. And they started getting industry money. And where did it come from? Well, the vegetable oil industry, Procter and Gamble, they sold soy oil and cottonseed oil. And shortly after they accepted the money, they started saying that these oils, industrial oils that never existed before the industrial era, were the answer to heart attacks. And at the same time, they suppressed the data that was rolling in that cigarette smoking was causing heart attacks. And the American Heart Association never sounded the alarm. Never. To this day, in their list of accomplishments, they do not list having sounded the alarm on smoking and heart attacks, because they didn't. They suppressed it. So they're an evil organization.
Well, they were actually correct, though. They said it would lead to the answer to heart attacks is, I believe, what you said. They just forgot the word increase.
Yeah. Yeah, they actually got it exactly backwards, didn't they? And ever since then, I mean, this is really the story of the American Heart Association's relationship with industry is really the story of the biggest scandal perpetrated on the American population in history. And really the biggest fraud perpetrated on the human race. And if you think about all the pain and suffering that has caused by promoting vegetable oils as healthy and taking people away from the foods that they love, the traditional foods that supported health throughout history, that's billions of deaths on their hand and untold amounts of suffering. And the problem is that it doesn't end there. They corrupt medical education.
Yes, indeed they do, along with other interests, like oil interests from Rockefeller, who catalyzed essentially the destruction of natural medicine in 1910 with the Flexner report that he compiled, catalyzed with also Andrew Carnegie. So it's just really sad. But with your training in molecular biology and biochemistry, I'm wondering if you could help us understand the mechanism that occurs, because when I was reviewing my book with you, we had a dialogue about this, and the book is Your Guide to Cellular Health, the unlocking the keys to longevity and joy was the full title of the book, which I love that title. My focus was on oxalams, and when I mentioned that to you, you were a little bit dismayed disappointed because your perception was an oxalams is short for oxidative linoleic acid metabolites, for those of you who aren't familiar with biochemical jargon. It seemed to me that was accurate, but you had some concerns, mostly because it's not so much the damage from the oxalams that are metabolized endogenously, but there's actually probably more significant reactive aldehydes that occur in the industrial production of these vegetable oils. So can you walk us through that and how these reactive molecules cause oxidative stress and ultimately impair and decrease mitochondrial function in the production of cellular energy?
The bottles, as they come out of the factory, have small amounts of toxins, small but significant, because some of these toxins are very serious, like 4-hydroxynonenal and other aldehydes. But when you cook with them, even just when you store them, after you open the bottle, oxygen starts reacting again. When you store them, you get slow production of more toxins. But when you cook with them, the oxidation accelerates, you get rapid toxicity forming, and all of these toxins end up in the food that you eat. And these end up in your digestive system where they start killing off the beneficial bacteria. They start promoting inflammation in your gut. And then they go to your liver where they start damaging liver cells, and they start making it difficult for your liver to do its basic jobs. And eventually what happens is all of these toxins deplete our bodies of the natural antioxidant systems that help us generate energy, that help us control oxygen in our body. We have to control oxygen in our body to generate energy in our mitochondria. And these vegetable oils contain toxins that create conditions in our body where we can no longer properly control oxygen energy. And that state has a name. Well, I'm giving it a name. I call it insulin resistance. And it is insulin resistance. And everybody's talking about insulin resistance, and nobody's really talking about the root cause. But the root cause, as I describe in my book, Dark Calories, is oxidative stress, and primarily coming from vegetable oils, which are oxidative stress in a bottle.
So let's pivoting back to insulin resistance. You introduced me, or maybe I had heard of it before, but I certainly didn't recall it, to a very important marker. And I was using a surrogate marker of that, which is metabolic flexibility, which is the only knowledge I had of to assess the population, a pretty good marker of mitochondrial function in the population, because there's the NHANES data that did that in analysis and published from in I think 2022, but it was data from 2018, so already it's 6 years old. That 93.1% of the people at that time had metabolic inflexibility by these criteria. That's pretty astounding, for sure. But if I would have known that there was a surrogate marker for insulin resistance, is pretty darn accurate, and in my view, far more powerful and predictable than metabolic flexibility, I would have used it, but I didn't know of it. And you introduced me to that. And that test is called HOMA-IR, which is homeostasis model assessment of insulin resistance, an assay that was developed in 1985. And it uses the benchmark gold standard of insulin resistance. It's done in the research labs, which is a glucose clamp, a euglycemic and hyperglycemic clamp test, where you're hooked up to an insulin IV and do a glucose tolerance test. And I've never seen one done or witnessed it, but it's quite involved, and it's something you wouldn't want to do routinely, for sure. So they did this hard work and studied a large number of people and came up with a very powerful correlation that easily is reproduced, and almost every one of us watching this can do it inexpensively and easily. A simply measure of fasting insulin and fasting glucose, something you could probably do even if you paid full price for under $50.
Yes, actually, yeah. I have a link, and maybe in the show notes if you want to do that. I have a web page where I direct people to get it from one of those retail labs, so you don't even need a doctor's order, and it's $45. You're
there you go. Yeah, so that said, it should be under 50. If you have a good lab, I know I myself can do it for under 10. Maybe in the link you gave, they're calculating the HOMA-IR, but for those of you who aren't doing that, or you have your fasting insulin, it has to be fasting. It doesn't work if it's not fasting, folks. And the fasting glucose done at the same time. It's really important they're done at the same time. You multiply those two numbers together, easy to do. Use a calculator if you'd like, probably easier. And then divide by 405 if you're in the US. If you're in Europe and you have different units, then you divide by 22. And then you'll come up with a number. And that number should be less than 1. And I never knew this. And Cate did the really important, and as far as we know, the only person to do this evaluation. She used that same data from the NHANES, 2018 study. And she did, and I want her to explain it, but she analyzed the data and determined that less than 1% of the population in the US is or maybe the converse, 99% are insulin resistant. Only 1% are insulin sensitive. And then this supports your clinical experience too. So why don't you help explain how you identified this tool and the analysis you went to come up with, reach this conclusion?
Yeah, so the first thing that I think is really important to understand is that cutoff value of 1.0 or less being normal, ideal really, was not easy to sort out because there is currently no consensus. So when you look at some researchers, they're going to give you different numbers. Although it might be 3.6 or 2.7 or 2.4, and they're all over the place. And I chose 1.0 based on some older data and just based on healthy cutoffs of glucose and insulin levels. And the reason I wanted to use the older data is so important to talk about. And that is because over time, as our diets have been getting worse, we've been eating, well, these days we're eating about 3 or 4 times the volume of vegetable oil that we were back in the 80s when this data, the better data came, where the cutoff value was 1.0. So our population basically is getting less healthy. And that means we aren't studying normal people anymore. We haven't defined health recently, and we define health based on the bell curve. So if somebody's, within the 95% of the average numbers, we define that as normal. So that's how, for example, a fasting insulin level is defined as, by some labs, 25, versus healthy people seem to have fasting insulin levels of 5 or less. So it's 5 times. So that's how far off our averages are. We've deviated so far at the population level from normal metabolic health that we can't even define it with modern data. We have to go back in the past. And so back in the past, researchers did, the same kinds of population studies, and they looked at longitudinally the people who had the HOMA-IR score of 1.0. They followed them for a few years and they stayed healthy. They didn't develop metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. So it was a pretty good solid study back then, certainly better than now because the population was healthier. So that's one reason. And then the other way I came to the number 1.0 is just, looking at what do healthy people in my population and in the low carb world, we're doing a lot of fasting insulin levels in the low carb world. What do people generally see when somebody's lost the weight and got to their ideal body weight, feels great, feels energized all the time? Well, it's almost always less than 5 insulin fasting. And this is United States units.
Yes.
And, some people say it's even probably 4 or lower. And then you also have to look at the fasting blood sugar value too, which when I first graduated, the normal ranges, actually when I first went to medical school, I had an older textbook and the normal ranges for fasting glucose were 65 to 85. And now they're 70 to 100. And again, this is just the population, our health has shifted. Nobody's talking about it. We're just saying, oh, let's just reset the numbers. That's like grading the population on a curve. Just because everybody's unhealthy, suddenly it's healthy? That makes no sense. So that's why I spent a lot of time doing the research, and I dive into it. I spend about 2 pages of the book talking about this because it's such an important concept. It's defining the threshold of metabolic health versus metabolic disease with a simple lab test. And, it's a very important thing to do.
Yeah, I think that was one of the highlights of your book, quite truthfully, and at least from my appreciation, because it's so powerful, so inexpensive, so practical, and I think everyone should be seriously considering this. And I want to state that the lowest HOMA-IR that you've seen in your practice was 0.4. Is that right?
Yes, it has been of my own patients. Yes,
yeah,
0.4.
So, and I have my last fasting blood, because I wanted to see what it was. I did a fasting blood insulin, or fasting insulin, and it was 1.2, which is pretty low. And it gave me a HOMA.
It was 0.2.
Was it 0.2?
Yeah, it was even better. Yours was the best.
No. The fasting insulin.
Oh gosh, I
The
did it
fasting,
again. I
the
did this
fasting,
last time we talked too.
yeah.
Yeah.
The fasting insulin is 1.2, but the HOMA IR score was 0.2,
Yes.
50% lower than the best you've ever seen.
Yes.
So I wanted to brag about that because it took a while to get there. But it's really the magic of being insulin sensitive. And I did this eating 500 grams of carbs, 500 grams of carbs a day.
But healthy carbs, right? It's not sugar or refined flour, right? I wouldn't think.
Well, we have a disagreement on no refined flour. I don't, but flour is an issue for different reasons.
Yes.
Because not aside from the carbs. Actually, I'm a big fan of starch. Big fan of starch. I think it's healthier than as a form of fuel, potentially healthier than fruit. Although I'm a big fan of fruit too, and I have a lot of fruit. But I think starch, if you're healthy, can be even better because the starch polymers, they're just metabolized in a different way. And starch also is pure glucose. There's no fructose in starch. It's just whereas fruit is 50% fructose. So I think
Right.
glucose is a healthier monosaccharide than fructose for sure. So I think that's why it's a little bit healthier. But the point is that most people outside this community would think that that's a prescription for disaster, 500 grams of carbohydrate. And there's no way. Is the solution for diabetes or insulin resistance is to cut your carbs.
I agree. Like people.
So why don't you comment on that? Because this is we're in agreement on this. That almost everyone believes that outside this small community, right?
Well, yes. I mean, those people who do believe that type 2 diabetes is related to diet and not an inevitability of genetics, which is a whole other category of problems, right? That's what the American Diabetes Association has been promoting, that, we don't know where it comes from. It's genetic or lack of exercise, right?
Ignorance, right?
Yeah. But then there's the more like a somewhat awakened medical community and healthcare community that are saying, oh no, it's from just, we have so many refined carbohydrates. And I would say that refined carbohydrates, definitely play a role, but they play less of a role than vegetable oils because the root cause is oxidative stress. The root cause of insulin resistance is oxidative stress. And that's what I talk about in my book, Dark Calories, right? So I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's what my research suggests, that the root cause is oxidative stress. Vegetable oils promote oxidative stress. Toxins, all sorts of toxins can promote oxidative stress. And vegetable oils are the most potent source of toxin in the food supply. But other refined ingredients are problematic and can promote oxidative stress as well. They're not as powerful as vegetable oil. But for example, sugar, just cane sugar doesn't have nutrition, right? So if you were getting 400 grams of sugar, or 450 grams of sugar every day, which is, that's like close to 2,000 calories of just pure sugar. Like, just say you just drank, a couple of those Mountain Dew things that are like those extra big gulps, right? You drank like 4 of those every single day. You would not be getting a lot of nutrition, right? It's taking the space of nutritious food in your diet. Or if you were getting enough, then on top of it, you'd be eating all those extra calories and you would be gaining weight like mad, right?
Yeah.
So both of those things promote oxidative stress. Excess calories promote oxidative stress, and nutrient deficiency, that promotes oxidative stress as well. So when you look at nutrition and health through the lens of oxidative stress, it is so powerful because it helps bring everything into clarity. You just have to ask the question, okay, is this thing promoting oxidative stress? And so if you're getting your 450 grams of carbohydrates from wholesome foods that are enabling you to get all your, macro and micronutrients, then that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
So
the more extreme you are on any macro, the harder it can get. Like if you're super high fat, it can be hard to get some, vitamin C and some B vitamins. It can be harder. You have to do more. You can do it, but
it's another discussion. But I believe high-fat diets will cause oxidative stress too, independent of the seed oils or vegetable oils. So with respect to oxidative stress, though, being the causal factor. We're not in complete agreement on that. I think it's absolutely important. I think the primary cause is vegetable oils. No disagreement there at all. I just think it's an almost moot, irrelevant disagreement, though, because it doesn't really matter. My contention is that the oxidative stress is the problem because it damages the mitochondria. So in other words, if you were somehow to magically instantaneously replace all your mitochondria and you had also oxidative stress, it's going to take a while to damage it, and that damage would be repaired instantly.
Right.
But eventually it would kill the mitochondria again. So ultimately, it's important. They go hand in hand, oxidative stress. And if you eliminate the oxidative stress, there's not an issue, no question. So we're on pretty similar grounds there. I just taken the next step because there's other things you can do to enhance mitochondrial function. If you put the focus there as the foundational cause, then there's a lot of other strategies other than just eliminating oxidative stress that can be restorative. But with respect to the carbohydrates, it's not that simple. I think there's some really important details that need to be examined. And you alluded to using big gulps as a form of carbohydrates, and that's never a solution, primarily because it's not that the sucrose is an issue. It's the way that it was extracted, because it's typically high fructose corn syrup, and that's a highly processing of the carbohydrate, which is problematic. So I don't think taking high fructose corn syrup in any way, shape, or form is ever a good strategy unless it's your only form of calories, and you need calories to survive. Then it would be the better choice. But you could, the converse of this, and we probably have some disagreement on this too. I think there are many, many people who have, as a result of this mitochondrial damage from the oxidative stress, the sort of the end target organ for this is the gut. And the gut gets destroyed. You have a disruption in the microflora, and this disruption in the microflora causes a shift to pathogenic bacteria, which are seriously exacerbated when you eat most carbohydrates, which is the conflicting, confusing variable here. And the reason why so many people go on low carb and feel better, because they lower the carbs and they get better, and they do. There's no disagreement there. They get better because their endotoxin loads decrease, as they should when they decrease carbs. So the solution, if you're in many people are in this state, many are, I would venture to say, to a degree, almost everyone watching this is in some state, maybe some almost irrelevant, some quite significant, and it's killing them for sure, no question. So the solution, and that this is your problem if you have a lot of food allergies and you can't eat any carb. The moment you're eating carbs, you're on a low carb diet, and you stay there, because the moment you eat them, you have a problem. That is a clue. That is a major clue. And the solution to this, it's a short-term solution, but nevertheless, it's a workaround, because I believe you need, every one of us, and there's very compelling evidence, need 250 grams of carbohydrates, just the baseline. Now, I mean, every adult, every normal weight adult, like 150 pounds, I'm not saying a child needs 250 grams of carbs, but a normal healthy weight adult should be at 250 grams. And if you don't get that, you're going to have to make the carbohydrates yourself. You do that endogenously. That allows the release of the stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and glucagon. And that causes stress and oxidative stress. But the solution to that is to give yourself the calories, admittedly a highly refined carbohydrate, which is pure glucose, no fructose. And it's called dextrose. You can buy it in the store. It's pretty inexpensive, about $2 a pound in bulk. And you can get, as a short-term solution, you can radically increase your carbs without causing endotoxin to increase. No endotoxin increase. So you can take the food and you can get energy back. Your brain goes back online. You have energy. You're not fatigued. You can think clearly and get to function until you can gradually shift over to healthier foods like rice that has these glucose polymers that are much healthier. And obviously dextrose has no micronutrients, admittedly, no question, but that's easily compensated by taking a B complex and some other nutrients, other healthy foods. So it's a minimal side effect for a short-term solution, I think is really essential to most people recovering their health, so they can go the next step and engage in and start the journey towards a more comprehensive selection of a wider variety of carbohydrates that they can integrate into their food and not have complications by exacerbating endotoxin production.
And the other thing that I wanted to accomplish with with dark calories was to help people understand that, I think everybody knows that ultra processed food is bad and processed food is bad. And the Western diet has been, talked about as the cause, like this deadly diet that we invented. But nobody has made it clear, crystal clear. What is it about processed food that's bad? What even is processed food, right? Have you ever heard anyone define it clearly? You have?
Well, you have.
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Yeah.
In dark calories, like that was the goal, because I really just want to help people, understand this conversation that more and more folks are having now around this term ultra processed food, which has not been defined.
What percentage is it? 66% of the calories are ultra processed?
Well, it depends how you define it. And so the way I define it, it's actually more than 70%.
Oh, okay.
It's
well, it's
pretty
close.
close to 75%.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the way I define it is based on ingredients. And so it's vegetable oils, which didn't exist before the end of, they're more processed than anything else. They're like defining feature of processed food. They put the junk in junk food, vegetable oils, and refined sugars and flours, right? So those are things that are very low in nutrition, but they're ubiquitous in, crackers and cookies and processed food and cereals and all kinds of junk foods that we know are harming our health. And then I don't even really like the refined protein powders either, like, the hydrolyzed soy protein and the soy meal and a texturized vegetable protein that's added to so many foods now, and people don't even read the ingredients or know what they're eating. So with our calories, I really want to help people understand that these are the three things that are they're the defining feature of what most people are eating. Close to 77% of the average person's calories are coming from just these three categories of ingredients: the refined vegetable oils, the hateful eight, the refined sugars and flours, and then the refined proteins that are extracted from whole foods the same way vegetable oils are extracted from whole foods, and the same way sugars and flours are extracted from whole foods. That is the problem. It's very simple. I just wanted to kind of clarify it for the modern diet that we live in now, so people can scan ingredients and recognize and understand what they're eating and stay away from these things, which are killing us. I mean, there's no disagreement at that. Even the American Heart Association would agree that ultra processed food is associated with worse health outcomes. They just define it. They define they include vegetable oil as one of the more healthy foods. So they're wrong about their definition of what ultra processed food is, unfortunately.
Clearly, yes. So you mentioned the protein, like specifically soy. So it's, aside from being processed, it's also a problem from other reasons, because you can have perfectly unrefined soy. Tofu would be an example. So those are problematic for other reasons, because they are highly estrogenic. They're phytoestrogens. And they complement all the xenoestrogens you're exposed to from the incredible amount of panoply of the chemicals soup that we're involved with, that have these what's called EDCs globally, which is endocrine disrupting chemicals. Most of them are xenoestrogens, and they stimulate the estrogen receptor. So the last thing we need to do in today, in the 21st century, is to stimulate our estrogen receptors. It's almost, this stimulation of the estrogen is almost responsible for all the breast and prostate cancers. If you could block that estrogen receptor by not continually activating it, you can make that disease almost disappear. So having said that, not included in the hateful eight oils that you list is flaxseed oil. I wonder what your thoughts are on flaxseed oil.
I wouldn't cook with it, but if you like the taste of it, go ahead and put it on your salads. But flaxseed oil, the reason I say I wouldn't cook with it is, even if it is extracted in a healthy way, cold pressed, and it doesn't need refining, it's a virgin oil, it's got all its antioxidants. It's very susceptible to oxidation because the omega-3 fats have more double bonds than the omega-2.
Yes.
And so they oxidize more quickly. So you just wouldn't want to cook with it. I don't really I don't think anybody recommends it as a cooking oil. It wasn't really traditionally even used as a cooking oil. It was more like a salad oil or finishing oil.
Yeah, I don't recommend anyone consume that. I think it's a toxic poison because it's an estrogen. It's probably the most potent phytoestrogen you can be exposed to. So unless you're interested in getting breast or prostate cancer, I would say avoid that like the plague.
Interesting.
Yeah, not a good strategy. And you're right on the omega-3s. They have one additional double bond, and in the fish oils, I forget which one. One of them has the DHA. I think has 4 double bonds. The EP has 3, I think.
I think it's 4 and 5. Like it
Oh,
depends
it's a
on
4 and 5. It
so,
might be 4 and 5. It might be
yeah.
another one. Yeah. Okay. So I was off by one, but it's definitely more
Yes.
because linoleic acid only has 2.
Right. Right. And the more double bonds that you have, this
The
is
worse
something.
it is. Yeah.
Yes, there should be a principle. So I coined this term, the double bond principle. The more double bonds you have, the faster the oil will react with oxygen and deteriorate it into toxins. And so most of the fish oils on the market, when they test them, they find that has already happened.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's why there's such mixed results on, whether supplementing with fish oil even helps.
I agree with you. This is when we're in complete alignment because I think there is some value to omega-3s from food. There's very limited value from processed omega-3s. I mean, we sell some that it's possible to make one, but it's very, very hard. Almost all the fish oils should be burned. They should not be sold. They cause more disease than they prevent. That's no question in my mind. But the ideal way that you should get your omega-3s are from seafood, healthy seafood, not seafood that's been farmed and raised and given grains and seeds to eat as their food. So they have linoleic acid in their tissues. You don't want that. You want healthy. You want the omega-3s generated from algae in the water, not from food that they're given as farmed animals. And there are very few companies that do make a healthy omega-3 supplement, like cod liver oil, and I believe astaxanthin, but krill can do them if it's harvested properly. But you have to be ultra, ultra careful, and they should not be synthetic. Most of the fish oils are ethyl esters. They're not in the triglyceride form. So you have to be very, very careful. I would stay clear of those for sure.
Well,
but that's your principle. Then the food in the natural food form, it's okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, fish, one of the foods that is commonly consumed raw, right? And that will prevent even oxidation from cooking occurring.
Right.
And one of the worst things that a chef will tell you that you can do with a fish is overcook it. You destroy it, right? And they do go bad quickly because of this fatty acid oxidation, right? That's why fish goes bad so quickly. That's why it's so easy to overcook. So chemistry explains a lot of very important things that come with how our body works and how we're supposed to feed ourselves. But, so now that we're talking about fish oil, a lot of people take it for brain health. And I want to kind of maybe connect to how does insulin resistance affect your brain health?
Yeah, that's a good combination because it probably is, I would say, the single biggest contributing factor.
Absolutely. And you can tell. And one of the things that I emphasize in Dark Calories, I wrote an entire chapter to explain how it's chapter 4. It's called Fat Bodies Starving Brains, because insulin resistance makes us build fat that we can't burn. And it also, at the same time, deprives our brain cells of energy. And so being insulin resistant is to be in a state of regular, excessive hunger. This is why people overeat. The excessive hunger is driving this Ozempic craze because it's the only thing that quiets their extreme hunger. As far as they know, of course, a healthy diet would do it as well, a lot better. But
less expensively and without decreasing your lifespan quite dramatically, right. And your pocketbook.
Right, and depleting your muscle. It's shown to do that now already. But also the other thing that, besides making you hungry more often, just feel like you need to snack between meals because your body fat's not supplying your cells with fuel, is it makes you feel irritable. It makes you, it makes your brain not function right. And I talk about studies where psychologists have tested people who are experiencing their blood sugar dropping, which is the hallmark of insulin. If you are insulin resistant, your blood sugar is not stable. you go through very commonly experience not just blood sugar highs, which everybody talks about, but your blood sugar will drop rapidly. And when your blood sugar drops rapidly, even if it goes from a high number to a normal number, that rapid drop registers as a problem for your brain, because your brain is
measures the delta. It reacts to the delta, the change.
Yes, it does. Exactly. And so your brain is actually struggling to get energy when that happens. This is how the brain works. And so when your brain is struggling to get energy, do you think you can concentrate at work? Do you think you can have a pleasant conversation with your spouse when you come home from work? Well, it's harder. Everything is harder. And I didn't know this myself, but my whole life I had probably mild insulin resistance, and it was getting worse as I was getting older because I was eating more vegetable oils unbeknownst to me. But my whole life, I felt like I had something wrong with me, because I would have this difficulty having conversations after work because I would be so mentally drained. And I felt like, it must be a terrible wife, because my husband would ask me this basic question, how was your day? And I would struggle to even remember what had happened during the day. And so I would naturally get angry at him for asking me that question, right? I guess that's what we do. We lash out. Well, I wasn't in a good mental space and I couldn't answer the question. And I just thought that was me. I took that on, right? I wasn't particularly overweight, although I did lose about 25 pounds after I fixed my diet. But I got my brain back. I realized that all these years, it wasn't me. It wasn't me being a sugar addict. That wasn't me. That was my metabolism. And so when I improved my diet, I improved my metabolism, I improved my personality objectively. You could ask my husband. And, I improved my immune system function. I improved every aspect of my health. And it just came from getting these three main big bad ingredients out of my diet. And then when I wrote Deep Nutrition, I added in some elements that are missing from most people's diet, like bone broth and some fermented foods and organ meats, and, rounded out my nutrition in an ancestral way. But I wanted to make that point because I know so many people struggle with not mental health, but not just mental health. They struggle with self-blame around willpower. And the point of this chapter 4 is that you don't even know how much willpower you have while your metabolism is damaged by insulin resistance, because it's not you. It's your brain being in an emergency, low energy state, just panicking. And that's not the way you're meant to live. You're meant to have a better life.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you for emphasizing that point. It's not necessarily your fault unless you know what the causes are and you fail to address it. But it's normal and predictable, what you're describing. And I contend that many of the experiences that you're describing, that you personally went through and resolved, are also experienced by many other people under different circumstances. And that is the central denominator in both of those is that you both share low carbohydrate load to the brain. Your brain requires an essential amount of carbohydrate, and insulin resistance certainly interferes with it getting that carbohydrate. But if you can supply that, and the central point, as you so wisely suggested, is to address the vegetable oils, get them out of your diet. That will help tremendously at resolving that. But I think in your case specifically, it seems like you're ascribing equal blame to the vegetable oils and the carbohydrates. And I don't know the type of carbohydrates you were consuming. There was a lot of high fructose corn syrup. It could have been, but if it was simpler carbohydrates or sugars, even sugars, unless they were connected, many sugars are. People. It's been my observation and experience that many people point the blame at sugar, and the foods that they're ascribing as being high sugar foods actually have more vegetable or seed oils in them. So it's
totally, yes.
So it's being unfairly villainized. It's taking the rap for the seed oils. It's not the sugar.
Yes.
So I'm suggesting, as I described earlier, I like to, because you didn't respond to that. You went into your book, which is fine, but maybe you can respond now. Is that if you supply a simple carbohydrate to get that sugar, the carb level up, bypassing temporarily the insulin resistance, get the carbohydrates into your brain, as so many people on low carb diets eventually experience. The symptoms you described are low carb symptoms, because you have to have those carbs in your brain, otherwise you will have that experience 100%. There's nothing about willpower involved, as you wisely stated. So if you can get that with some simple sugar like dextrose, it could be a crutch, a Band-Aid that you get through that helps you to the next level, so that you actually have that brain power. You can think, you're not craving, those cravings disappear, and it can make knowledgeable, wise choices and navigate a path to success.
So what I believe is that it's important to get, when you're metabolically damaged, you may absolutely need more sugar than normal. I mean, you absolutely do need more sugar than normal. There's no doubt about it. But it's difficult to get that at a healthy rate into your bloodstream, because if you drink that big gulp, you're going to have a huge spike, and then you're going to have a huge of sugar, then you're going to have a huge spike of insulin.
You don't never want to drink a big gulp.
Again,
we're both in agreement. Never drink a big gulp.
Right.
No, not a good strategy.
So it has to be in a form that comes out of your digestive system slowly. It's kind of like time release sugar.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of carbohydrates that I recommend. And
so my solution for that,
they're not hard to come by,
is to use the dextrose. I have people using a pound of dextrose, 16 ounces, in a half a gallon of water and sipping it all day long. So they're not drinking it like a big gulp. They sip it over a whole day. So it's like almost like when you go into the hospital, and we both know this, many people watching this don't. Most people who are in the hospital get an IV. What is that IV? That IV is typically D5W, dextrose, 5% in water. That's what the D stands for. That's dextrose, as some other name, same molecule for glucose. So they drip it in all day long. You get 3 bags of glucose, 5% of a liter. That is 50 grams. I think it's 50 grams, isn't it? 5%? Yeah, 5 grams. Yeah, it'd be 50 grams per liter. Yeah. 50 grams. Yeah. So they're getting 150 grams of, if you get 3 bags, which is common. You've done a lot of hospital medicine, as I have. And typically a liter bag gets hung over 8 hours, and they get 3 bags a day. That's 150 grams of sugar, which is actually, I believe, one of the best things they do in the hospital, because most hospitals kill you prematurely. But one of the best things they do is give you an IV drip of dextrose.
Yeah,
which ascribes to your valid concern. You do not want to get this real quickly. It's why you sip it all day long. Sip it.
Yeah, I think you can maybe accomplish the same thing, like the way I've accomplished the same thing.
100%.
Is by just like whole foods that digest and break down slowly, and getting so peanut butter, for example, it's got a lot of starch in there, and it'll get into your bloodstream slowly. And if you're not sure, you can always do a little biohacking trick and get a continuous glucometer and see how are these foods actually affecting your blood sugar. And it's a lot of fun to do. And so you can validate the idea that just a little bit, that these slow digesting carbohydrates truly are slow digesting for you. Because everyone is a little different. Like some people say blueberries spike their blood sugar. Some people say they have the opposite effect.
You're right. That could be because of food allergies, which causes
the microbiome and your microbiome and just
but the food allergies are related to microbiome, because that's what causes it. Your microbiome, because you get this leaky gut and those food molecules get in, you have a reaction to them.
Yeah, sure.
So they're totally connected. But you're right. That's a separate issue. But you can still have those simple sugars like the dextrose, and sip it slowly all day, and you'll get that in pretty dramatically. You won't have an endotoxin reaction, and your brain will wake up again, because you're giving it fuel. It's not hard to imagine that when you don't have fuel to the brain, you're going to have problems. 100% you're going to have problems.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of crazy that the low carb community, they're doing so much good for people, but they aren't focusing enough on what is it that's really doing the good. And
so why did they kick you out of their community?
I don't know, honestly. I wish I knew
Oh,
the
come
answer.
on,
I don't know if they really have. I don't know if they really have. I just know that I used to get invited to conferences, and now I've offered to go and email and give different talks, and nobody writes me back. So I don't know. I honestly don't know. Ostracization is really, you're ostracized. They don't do you the privilege of sharing what they're thinking about you. So, but I mean, I'm in touch with individual doctors. It's just that the when it comes to getting on, stage, they don't want me on stage. I honestly don't know why. Maybe they don't think I'm a good presenter. Maybe it's something as simple as that. I have no idea.
No, you're clearly, that's not true. We know that. Anyone can see that you are. You know your material and you present very well. You have a very
Thank
good
you.
vocabulary. So it's clearly a objection to one of your positions. So what do you think it is?
Well, I think it's that I emphasize I downplay the role of carbohydrates. If I had to guess, that would be the guess. Because I remember the last talk that I was able to give, I talked about how I talked about a study. I presented data from a study that showed that the vegetable oils shut down mitochondria, and I laid out my hypothesis that could lead to insulin resistance, the way I laid out in chapter 3 of Dark Calories, by just making us need more sugar, our requirements for sugar go up. And that was that, like, the audience was really interested, but then there was one member of the audience who was kind of a leading voice who gave me this really bizarre question. He said, "Have you done a double-blind human trial to prove your theory?" And I thought that was a ridiculous question because he knows I'm not in academia. He knows I'm not that kind of in that position to do that. And he knows it would be difficult to prove. And he knew I didn't because I would have presented it if I had. So I thought it kind of caught me a little bit off guard. But, I explained what I just said. I'm not in a position to do that, but I would love to. But that was like, after that, no one else was allowed to ask questions after my talk. And, they cut off questions after that. And then I
Really?
wasn't
The
invited back.
moderators just cut off questions.
Yeah.
And aborted the Q&A session?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was kind of I had already answered a few questions, so it
But there was
wasn't
still
like
time left.
that bizarre, but it just seemed like, I don't know.
Well,
like,
now you know the answer.
rude.
Now you know the answer.
I guess, but that's just one person's opinion. There's other people in the low carb community that I thought agreed with me, or else they're just smiling and nodding when I go on their podcasts. So I don't really know what people think, but I feel like they're doing a disservice because truly, here's the thing, Dr. Mercola, that the keto diet doesn't work any better than the standard American dietitian diet for diabetes, unless the dietitians also tell people to eat more butter, eggs, cheese, saturated fat-rich foods. I discuss this in my book, that there are about 6 trials where dietitians did a keto diet that was high in vegetable oils. That was low carb, but high in vegetable oils. And that diet failed to be any better than the standard American diabetes diet. But when the keto diet was able to exclude vegetable oils, whether they intentionally did it or not, they don't say in their studies, but they did specifically say that they promoted the foods that would raise cholesterol, which most dietitians are terrified of recommending butter and eggs and cheese and, fatty meats. But the keto diets that work, those dietitians had lost their fear of cholesterol. They went through this process that, when we started our whole conversation, they learned the American Heart Association had lied to them. So this is yet another example of how the American Heart Association is holding medical science hostage to their flawed idea and holding the world hostage to a textbook full of diseases, to all the chronic diseases because of this one flawed idea. And the keto community is just slowly starting to wake up, I think, now to the importance of vegetable oils. But honestly, when I first attended in 2010 a meeting of the low carb, the Obesity Medicine Association, and listened to the low carb doctors talk, they didn't even know what vegetable oils were.
Yeah. Well, you introduced the concept to many people. You're a
To
pioneer.
them, I introduced them to the presidents, several of the presidents, former presidents now, of the American the Obesity Medicine Association. I gave them my books. I met with them personally and talked about what they are and how they are bad for us.
Mhm.
And now they are, even though they don't want me to give the talks, they took my advice to some extent. It's sort of mind-boggling and very frustrating because
Sure.
they could do a lot more good if they wanted to.
Well, I've interviewed Dr. Tim Noakes, who's, I think, considered to be one of the expert researchers in the low carb space. He's a physician from South Africa who was criticized quite severely by the Nutritional Association out there, and he filed a lawsuit against him, or I forget who sued who, but he eventually wound up being victorious. And during our interview, he explicitly stated that carbohydrates are not a requirement for human nutrition. I almost fell down when I heard that. And technically, he is accurate. What he said is truthful, 100%. You can live. You won't live for long or won't live well. But what he didn't understand, that they are conditionally essential nutrients, like many things in life. And the same can be said for collagen, which you wisely alluded to in your comment on bone broth earlier. And same condition. They are not required. You cannot make these. I mean, you can make some. You can make some glycine. You can make some other, the proline, hydroxyproline. But that doesn't mean you can make enough. And you will never be healthy unless you get them in the requirements that your body needs. And it's physiologically and biologically impossible to make them what your body needs. Because of that technicality, they can legally get away with making that statement. And in my mind, it's scientific fraud. And I don't think it's intentional, but the reality is it doesn't matter if you break the law and don't know it. They're breaking the law. They're spreading fraudulent information, because these are absolute requirements for optimal health. If you don't get enough carbohydrate in your body, you are in for trouble. And this is what the keto people are adopting these programs, and they're getting benefit. Again, I said that earlier. They definitely get benefit because they're not increasing endotoxin production, but they stick on it and they do well for a while. Then they start getting worse and worse and worse because they're suffering from the signs of carbohydrate deficiency, and they can't make enough, and they're getting chronic stress. They're depleting their muscle mass because they're activating cortisol all the time. It's sucking out the protein from their muscles, and it's not at a cost. It is not biologically efficient to convert protein to sugar. You're wasting a lot of calories when you do that. So it's just a mess. It's an absolute mess.
I think the study of, they're mostly basing that concept on like hunter-gatherers, I think a lot of it came out of the paleo diet and this belief that people only ate animal products, for a certain portion of our history, but we don't know that is for sure. We don't know that, and we're assuming that, but we're talking about things that happened more than 50,000 years ago. We know that from 50,000 years ago to the present day, many cultures that we assumed were sheer hunter-gatherers, we were finding increasing evidence that they were eating a lot of plants. Like 50% of their diet could have come from plants in some locations. So, I mean, it's fascinating what we're learning. I think it's fascinating. But I think to go from, a minute amount of evidence, this assumption that hunter-gatherers never ate plants and therefore that's what we need to do to be healthy, is dangerous. We don't have enough evidence. You have to look at more evidence. And I think that's why I always go back to Weston Price. He did the best studies on what a healthy human population could thrive on. And it was, pretty diverse. There was a good amount of carbohydrates. Yeah. Some of them ate more, some of them ate less. Yeah. But what they all had in common was that they didn't eat the processed, refined, big, bad 3 ingredients that we're now eating to the tune of something 75 to 77% of our
I think a refinement of that comment would be the actual location where that food was grown. Why do I say that? Because in tropical locations, those plants make very, very little PUFAs. There's no need for them. PUFAs are only created biologically in plants if they have to survive in a cold environment. Right. Because saturated fats freeze, and that plant would die. You cannot grow a coconut tree in Chicago unless it's indoors. It will not work. That plant will die. all right, because it's a tropical plant and it has saturated fat. There's almost no PUFAs in a coconut oil, almost none.
Right.
Yeah.
And also that the northern climates, they're colder, and to germinate the seeds, they use the PUFAs. The PUFAs waking up activate the germination process.
Yeah. It's very beautiful biologically. It's a survival mechanism, but it's not necessarily one that's going to optimize our health for sure. It's going to optimize the plant's health, not our health.
Right. Plants
Yeah.
didn't
So
evolve to help us.
it's you can say plants, but you have to be careful of where those plants are grown. It's a wide difference. And for the most part, it's true with fish too. Tropical fish don't have hardly any PUFAs. Cold water fish have a lot. Same principle. Same principle.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating. People have been able to thrive in all these different environments where you would think that they would be eating radically different foods, but because a large portion of most cultures' diets were animal products. And when it comes to the tissues, like the brain tissue and the muscle tissue and the heart tissue and the liver and all these things, those are fairly constant in the animal, no matter the latitude, right? Because so that is how I believe, is my thinking on it. That is how we maintain like this core set of nutritional requirements. It was a lot of animal products for sure. And, perhaps there was some time where we were sheer carnivores, but I'm not sure. Like maybe that was Neanderthals. Who knows? We don't know. It's so long ago. And they didn't leave cookbooks behind other than like the cave paintings, right? Somebody pointed out that they don't have salads on the cave paintings, but that's because they didn't have lettuce. But there actually are cave paintings of people milking some sort of a ungulate.
Yeah, well, imagine that. That's a pretty good one. And we're getting close to close. And I don't know, you mentioned it in dark calories, but if you did, I apologize for missing it. But nevertheless, the question I have is, what is your view on these odd chain saturated fats, which apparently, specifically C15 or pentadecanoic acid, has ostensibly been classified as the first essential nutrient in 75 years that's unidentified?
That's really interesting, because I was under the impression that, we elongate, we make carbohydrates, we make fatty acids from scratch. And I just hadn't really thought about the math of it. Like, do we do it 2 carbon groups at a time? It's really fascinating. I just don't know. I don't know that much about it. Yeah. But I do believe that if it is essential, then it should be easy to come by in animal tissues, right? For the principle of what we just talked about. There's these core dietary commonalities, whether, humans everywhere did eat nose to tail. And whether it was, from the sea or from the sky, birds or land animals, or small, big, whatever, we ate nose to tail. And mammals all have very similar body composition, and so do fish everywhere, whether they're in the freshwater or saltwater, very similar. So there's this core, so it should be easy to come by, is what I'm getting at. Like, it shouldn't be something that you have to supplement.
But only if the reason I mentioned this is because you gave the example of the caveman illustrations of milking ungulates, and well, that's where the primary source of these odd chain fatty acids are. They're from milk products, dairy products. That's where they come from. Yeah, that's the primary source. They're almost exclusively from that area. Now, you can get them from some plants, specifically the grasses, but they're plants that typically people don't eat.
Well, that's fascinating. So,
usually from ruminant. You can get them from ruminant animals.
Well, this is totally hypothetical, but I think one of the big differences between Homo sapien and Neanderthal is that perhaps it was dairy. Because we know that dairy elongates the tibia, the fibula, the long bones. The more dairy you consume, the longer those bones are. And that is one of the key anatomical differences between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. So there you are. And we know people have been dairying for at least 10,000 years. It could be way longer than that. But certainly would be.
You're a fan of milk and raw milk, I would assume.
Huge. I mean, I have raw milk every day. I'm maybe biased because I love it so much.
Yeah, no, I think it's a healthy bias for sure. I couldn't applaud it more. And I think many people don't hold that position, and I just saddens me when I see people comment this. So man was never designed to consume the milk of another animal. Okay, that's one way to look at it. That's your way. And many people feel that way, but you're depriving yourself of one of the healthiest foods on the planet.
Okay, so that argument, I think I have a good answer for that. So that means that we can't have honey either, because honey is made of plant semen and insect vomit.
Yeah. Good one. Good retort. I love that. That's good.
Thank you.
That's very good. Yeah. So any other comments? We're at our limit. So what would you like to definitely get the book, 100% Tart Calories. What would you like to say, and what your website and social media handles?
Well, I would like to thank you so much for having me on to have this important discussion. Thank you. And please come to my website. If you're listening, it's drcate.com, and that's spelled drcate.com. And then scroll down to towards the bottom where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, where I'll be able to keep you up to date with the new things that I'm working on and new articles as they're released, which is maybe once or twice a month. So
perfect.
Not too often. I'm not going to stuff your inbox.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for all the work you do in your pioneering efforts and bringing some sense of sanity to the world of the controversial world of carbohydrates and vegetable oils. Although I think vegetable oils, which I like to say seed oils, because it's technically more accurate. I use vegetable oils as a greenwashing strategy, because most of them aren't from vegetables.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, they don't come from broccoli and tomatoes.
No, not at all. But they make you think it does. If it's anything, because vegetable has gotten this appeal, this badge of health. If you're a vegetarian, they're the healthiest you could possibly be, but we know otherwise. So, all right. Well, thank you for all your pioneering work and your efforts to help educate everyone to make wise decisions so they can take control of their health.
And thank you for doing the same. And thank you so much again for having me on. It's been a pleasure.